OK, time now for Media Watch with James Creedon. Good to see you, James.
Likewise.
Now we're starting with last night in Sweden. Donald Trump's remarks about an incident in Sweden that has left Swedes baffled.
Swedes and Americans and everybody.
Everybody else,
and
actually, yes.
it sounds like a bad song, Last Night in Sweden, but it's not. It is a quote from a Donald Trump speech given in Florida, where he referenced a sort of list of incidents in Europe for the most part. You look at what's happening in Germany, you look at what's happening last night in Sweden. So he referenced an incident that had happened the previous evening in the previous night in Sweden that really people couldn't identify. They didn't really know what that incident might have been. We'll get to some theories, but first of all, some reactions. Carl Bildt, former Swedish Prime Minister, had this to say on Twitter: "What has he been smoking?" Meanwhile, the Swedish embassy in the US tweeted this: "We look forward to informing the US administration about Swedish immigration and integration policies." Now that is, you can see there that they've actually retweeted him or responded to his tweet because he clarified his statement. Some said it was sort of a deflection, if you like, but for I suppose you can be clement and say that it was a clarification without an apology. My statement as to what's happening in Sweden was in reference to a story that was broadcast on Fox News concerning immigrants and Sweden, but that isn't an incident. So I suppose you could be kind and just say it was awkwardly phrased, or you could be, as a lot of people chose to be on Twitter, sort of unkind and satirical and make it into a huge viral gag.
Fake news, perhaps.
Indeed. So I'll just show you some more. Chelsea Clinton got in on the game. What happened in Sweden Friday night? Did they catch the Bowling Green massacre perpetrators? Now, the Bowling Green massacre never happened. It was a reference made by Kellyanne Conway, Mr. Donald Trump's advisor, and there was no massacre in Bowling Green, and it became sort of, what would you say, a symbol of the somewhat inaccurate aspects of Trump administration communications and that whole irony of fake news but inaccuracies coming out of the Trump administration despite their criticism of fake news. What else do we have? The Swedish word for fact-checking, kallikritik. I'm not sure
I'm
if
impressed, James. Your Swedish pronunciation.
Well, I'm not sure you should be, but anyway, there you go. And another hashtag going around as well, J.K. Rowling. Now, there was an incident in Sweden, you see, and it was concerning a horse called Biscuit, who was rescued from a well. Now, this was obviously a story in Sweden about a horse called Biscuit that got a certain amount of media attention. J.K. Rowling reimagining Donald Trump's famous Make America Great Again slogan into something a little bit more, what would you say, biscuit orientated, make biscuit dry again. There you go. There's lots more on that.
I'm sure. And there was also lots of false solidarity with Sweden, seeing as there was no apparent incident.
There was nothing to be solidaire about. After the terrible events last night in Sweden, IKEA have sold out of this. A border wall. Again, that's a little dig at Donald Trump. In response to last night in Sweden, Sweden has deployed their elite force of super troopers. So
I like
basically,
that one.
the Swedish false solidarity merged with every Swedish cliché that ever existed under these different hashtags. Very few Swedes, or Swedes are a form of turnip, survivors after the Sweden incident. Terrorist group IKEA claims responsibility. Chief suspect seen escaping in a Volvo. So not even Volvo escaped. And then you have these fake Je suis, that quite hackneyed meme, whatever happened in Sweden. So there you go, lots of that.
And finally, James, some support the substance of what Donald Trump said about Sweden.
Well, some are saying, look, essentially he mangled his words. He referenced an incident. He was actually talking about a series of incidents or trends or tendencies regarding a spike in violent crime. And so some have been sharing graphs like this saying that violent crime is, in fact, on the increase in Sweden. And, of course, some on the alt-right will be linking that very closely to issues of immigration. But in any case, this was the real last night in Sweden. One person, again, using a sort of an IKEA image, and it might be difficult to read that there, but what they're saying is it still remains one of the countries with the highest quality of living in the world. Last night, Sweden was still one of the places that tops the charts in terms of countries where people would like to move to because of quality of life, etc., etc. So there you go. Perhaps things not quite so bad in Sweden after all, and there was no incident.
There was no incident. That we can establish.
Identify.
Yes. James, thank you very much for
Thanks
that.
very
James Creedon there with Media Watch.